Hello, everybody.
Mics will be off by default. You can choose to have your video on or off. We're going to drop you all out into breakout rooms at about halfway through for some form of networking. Please don't dominate the conversation. Let everybody have a bit of a chat. And here's a key one. It's all about respect. We've heard stories about people that have been inappropriate on video meetings over the last couple of weeks. So please, no sexism, no innuendo, no bad language, no slurs of any kind. In other words, just simply, please be nice. I know we've got a nice community, and I'm sure you will be, but it's better that we say than we don't. Now, if anyone does have any concerns about conduct over the next hour, please note the name of that person and privately message Brent, Neil, or myself. We'll consider removing them from the meeting. You've been warned. And you can ask questions via chat. We might pose one or two depending on how we go for time. Brent is going to be monitoring our chat channel, so he can always respond to things. And if you do want to ask a question, we'll try and keep questions to the end of the speakers' presentations if we have time, because we're conscious that we've got a bit to cram in, and there's some interesting things that I'm sure we're going to hear over the next hour. So shortly, we're going to have a chat with Stella Ward, the Chief Digital Officer at the Canterbury and West Coast District Health Board. But just before that, we'll get a quick update from Neil Hamilton, the GM of Canterbury Tech. Now I have to start screen sharing again, so hold please call it. There we go, and share. Hey!
Hey! We do have the technology, how about that? Thanks, Andy. I'm just going to skip through a few quick slides, much in the way that we normally would at one of our monthly meetings, but just zip through them. So warm welcome to some of our newest members, some of whom I know are on this call, so welcome. Companies BNZ, UB and PIC insurance brokers, and some of the students are definitely in attendance. Next, Andy. NPS, we're always proud of our NPS, aren't we? Which is some sort of gauge of how well we're satisfying our community with the events that we put on. And 2019's average was pretty good at 46. Anything above 0 is good. I reckon anything above 20, 30 is really good. So we seem to be clicking over okay on that front. And last month at Blink Innovation was well received. Tech Week has been postponed from May to July. There's some dates there, and it will be an online only series of events. We had a couple of events planned, Canterbury Tech events planned for Tech Week. We're just reconsidering how they might work in an online mode, but at the moment we're planning to run them online or some version thereof. And the other event organisers for Tech Week will be in the loop for reorganising their events too. So what have we got planned? Well, clearly our challenge is to remain relevant to our Canterbury Tech community. And at the moment we're experimenting clearly with running this forum online. You will get a survey tomorrow, and I'd love to get your feedback on how well or otherwise you think it works and what you'd like to see us do for our monthly events in future. They needn't be monthly, they could be more frequent, but at the moment we're going to stick with monthly. We ran a mentoring program last winter over a 12-week period. We're proposing to run it again this year twice. We don't have some dates organised yet. It will clearly be run in an online mode, and we're going to run it twice. One for people who've already embarked on a career in tech, to match you up with an industry mentor. Could be any subject matter you'd like. And the other running of it will be for people either completely fresh to the tech sector, working in the tech sector, or they could be new to Canterbury, and we're regarding that as a first job in Canterbury. And we're not a recruiter, but we'll match you up with a local mentor who knows how the sector works and can give some pointers to folks who are new to the sector to hopefully help you find a job in due course. We've also got, with our Memorandum of Understanding with Christchurch NZ, we're supposed to run some student and employer oriented events, and I'm just going to be having some conversations with the various tertiary institutions as to how we might run those online. So more on that in due course. Tech Week, there's a couple of events that have been postponed to July. A C-suite forum, which is I ran the first one of these last week for a small group of C-level folks from local technology companies. It was a modest audience of 20, but I'll be running these roughly once a fortnight, I think. And if you feel you can and should be part of that group, please drop me a line. And for the time being, the planning for our tech summit in September is continuing apace. Clearly, we may have to recut our cloth according to what sponsorship we can land and what level from 1 to 4 we're in towards September. But for the time being, the party line is we're planning an in-person event, but we're also looking at contingencies of running it in a mixed mode, some in person, some online, or wholly online, depending on how things unfold over the next few months. Next. So here's what we're doing tonight, and that's all I had to say. Back to you, Andy.
Cool. All right, so have we got Stella online and ready to roll?
And I just unmuted her, and we'll put her on the big screen.
And here she is.
Hi, everybody.
Hello, Stella.
Hello.
How are you finding life at the moment? I'm sure things are a little bit crazy for you.
Most definitely crazy, yes. I guess health is needing to go digital immediately, and so it's pretty challenging.
And that's part of the reason why we thought it'd be really interesting if you had 20 minutes to spare to have a chat to us about all the things we're doing. I know when I was speaking with you, and it was probably a little while back now, an Edmund Hillary thing that we were chatting at, you were saying, you had these initiatives in place, and I'm guessing some of that has changed. So you've been in the role now as Chief Digital Officer at CDHB for 2 years. How have you seen the role change in that time?
Well, probably some of it is about a greater partnership with the business. So I guess part of coming from a clinical background and stepping into this role has been around ensuring that it's not the IT team says no, it's around how is it that the business helps us identify the value that we need to drive. And so there's definitely been a greater connection between the people and tech component. So I've partnered with the Chief People Officer and the Chief Finance Officer in particular around the future of work and delivering faster value to the business through the use of platforms and much more mobile apps in that space. The other is around our maturity. So I think I've shared with several of you about our journey to cloud and the significant digital transformation story that's underway. And as part of that, the Canterbury District Health Board is the host for the clinical applications for the South Island. And we have been for quite a while, but we were pretty immature in terms of what it is to be a professional service. And so quite a lot of change around managed service provision, service desk, contracts, ensuring that our customers, not only our clinicians and our end users from a Canterbury perspective, but the whole of the South Island and now the whole of New Zealand. So as part of the cloud process, hosting applications that are accessed by all 20 DHBs. So that's a big thing. The cloud transformation has had a significant impact on my team, and so quite a lot of work around leadership, building capability, enhancing the skill set, and some of it's about hiring it, and some of it's about building it. So continuing to use the partnership approach that works very well for us, and we've demonstrated it's the right way to build capability. And I guess for me, the big change is I've gone from kind of being interested in providing some exec support to very much being operational and strategic in terms of responsibility and stepping into a leadership role, which I thought it would take a while for me to step into that, if I'm honest. But I'm the Deputy Chair of the National CIO Forum and partnering with the Ministry of Health around how do we deliver the national plans, and in particular the health information platform and the direction from government around digital and digital health.
So that's a heap of work you've already got on your plate, and you had that on your plate before the end of last year, when suddenly a global pandemic hits everything in healthcare. What have you seen change?
So probably from the point of view of planning, the good thing you'll be pleased to know is that we did actually review our pandemic plan and our business continuity plan, and literally signed it off in February. So tech did feature as part of it. I must admit, we weren't thinking it was going to hit us quite so soon, but it's important. So big use of remote working has been the biggest change. About 90% of the information services staff are working remotely. About 50% of the corporate staff are working remotely, and about 40% of the clinical staff, because obviously you still need clinicians at work, but outpatients have been impacted. And so we've got a total of about 1,500 people that are working remotely. And that's had a significant impact on our infrastructure, which we had plans for, but they've had to be fast-tracked. And so we deployed Microsoft Teams, but we'd kind of not told terribly many people, and we had a couple of groups that were testing it. So we literally went from 70 users to 1,700 users to 3,000 users of Microsoft Teams. So that's been a massive change. The other is the change in how people are accessing information. So the fact that we already had platforms like the ServiceNow and our Max app, people at staff have been able to access information around what do they need to do, how do they need to get leave, what's the information that they need to be using, and so we've had a significant number of people downloading the app in response to that. I'm going to pause there because you're going to ask me other questions, but there's just immense amount of work that has shifted in the last month.
Yeah, and that was, I guess, part of the next question is, having to put that pandemic plan together, getting it signed off in February, and then boom, 6 weeks later, not even that probably, you've got to press the go button on it. Was that, did you see that as being a potential thing at the start of the year?
I thought that we might be hit for a bad flu. So I was preparing for us to have to respond to a really bad flu, because the signals were that we were going to have one, and obviously flu features as part of that. But I think it caught us all by surprise, if I'm honest.
You got to go from pilot to full production with 3,000 users in the space of a week or so, and I think many businesses around the country have been caught in the same thing. So with all this, where do you think the technology has figured in the DHB's thinking? Have you seen it become more prioritised with everything that's happened over the last 6 weeks?
Yes, although I am very privileged to be in the district health board that I'm in. We've got a board and an executive who understand the importance of technology in efficiency and effectiveness and enhancing patient care. And so we've had a long-term investment in using technology to improve the way we do things. And we had a plan for what we needed to achieve this year and for next year. So what's happened is we've kind of moved some stuff around, fast-tracked some infrastructure, fast-tracked some ways of working, and so I'm lucky in that regard, is that we are the most digital health system in the country, and we've just gone up another gear.
That's awesome. And I'm curious, what sort of cultural shift was entailed in overcoming some of those hurdles along the way, and what was the thing that struck you as being the things you weren't expecting?
Digital literacy. Wow. Even in the IT crew. So there has been significant work that we've had to put in place in terms of supporting our service desk. So not that they were illiterate, but that they weren't necessarily across all the modern workplace tools. And while we had a plan to work with Microsoft and others around how to build that capability, we've had to do it at speed. So the great thing is that Microsoft has been very supportive, as have other organisations that have already done this. They've shared their collateral, and so we've been able to use that with, luckily we also had a really good online health learn platform which people could access and knew how to use. But the executive, for example, as much as I've had great support from my colleagues around this, when I said to them, this is how we're going to be doing meetings and this is how you do it, simple things like, you know, where to look into a camera, how to do virtual meetings, all that cultural stuff has been immense. And of course our board has had to go there too. So we've had our first subcommittee meeting of the Canterbury board using Zoom, and we've had the first board meeting on the West Coast using it as well. And so just getting board members to understand, you know, virtual meeting protocols and having to do some quiet coaching. And luckily both boards were using online platforms to be able to see their board papers. So we'd already moved from paper board papers to paperless. So that I was grateful for. And I guess the other is just that ways of working. My team have reflected, and I've also had conversations with peers and also with family, that everyone's knackered because this is fantastic. It's really productive, but you're always on. There's a task being assigned to you. There's a meeting request happening. And so that downtime or that time to think, that's been quite a challenge for people. And as we're all learning to use a new medium and still delivering the work, people are pretty tired.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I'm guessing it's changed the whole pile of your workloads as well significantly. You've had to reallocate resources, and how's everyone coped with the pressure of, you know, going into that sort of situation?
My team have been amazing because we haven't increased the FTE and because we just haven't been able to, but through collaboration with our partners and also just really focusing. So we'd started to move to sprint planning and agile and, you know, all the stuff that is the buzz around how IT gets delivered. We're getting more, and luckily we just started to get a little bit more mature about that. But you know, 90% of the team working remotely, they've all had to go check the tech, make sure they know how to use it, make sure they can coach each other how to use it. We've had immense support from our vendor community, who, I mean, some of them, there's been sales opportunity, but the ones that we already have relationships with, that's been fantastic. The service desk calls have doubled, so they're slammed, and so helping the business to prioritise. So that the thing that happens in a process like this for a health system, we go into our SIM structure, which is how you respond to an incident management system, basically. And so I'm also the incident controller for Information Services Group response, which means I say no to some of the BAU tasks and help prioritise the activity for the teams. And that's really important because there's lots of demand coming from the business, coming from the system. We've had to relocate teams, set up CBACs, set up new testing environments, deliver new tech. And so if there's an ability to help the team prioritise what's the next thing they need to do. So we've used, we call it the warboard, but it's basically the blackboard inside Teams for task annotation. That's going really well. And I guess I also want to call out the fact that if you're a local, you know that the Christchurch Hospital Hagley is any day now in terms of delivery. We've been hearing about for a while, but we have deployed all the tech they need for the ICU and the ED in 10 days. And so really proud of the team.
That's impressive. I'm sure there's been some creative thinking in the last few weeks. Any innovative developments that have come out of the current situation?
Yeah. So some of it's about building on the innovation we already have. Some great work happening with streamliners and health pathways and COVID-19 pathways, which are connected and now available nationally, and obviously also because that's a company that's got activity internationally, getting alignment of local advice. So, and then building on that, in partnership with the Ministry of Health and the data and digital team, there is, okay, how do we ensure that Health Pathways was designed for health professionals, and often mainly around primary, around the doctors really. There is our allied health pathways as well. But this is about a collaboration that we'll see between Streamliners and another local company who have been building the Health Workers app, so that all 260,000 health workers will be able to have access to the same COVID-19 information, so that we're all consistent, because it's really, I mean, it's hard for the public. It's also hard for the health workforce. The messages keep changing, rumours go around, when and how do you wear PPE, all of that stuff. So giving people really up-to-date information is one of the things. I'm currently working through a chatbot process, so that's pretty exciting. There's been some great activity inside the hospital walls. So again, partners that we've already had around getting rid of the paper inside the hospital, and so working to drive that up at speed. And the other, which is broader than IT, but some of the local tech companies around the supply chain for personal protective equipment, PPE, looking at how do we get some face shields done pretty quickly, because the supply chain is struggling at the moment, and we want to make sure we give confidence. It's really important that our health workforce feels supported, and that we're absolutely chasing the gear to support them with COVID-19.
Yeah, it makes good sense. Well, last couple of quick questions. If there was one technology-related problem that you wish Canterbury Tech members could magically fix, what would it be for you at the moment, Stella?
Well, I'm greedy, always, and those of you who know me, well, I can't come up with one. So one is sanitisation of tech. It's really hard when you think about all of the places that you take a smartphone or a tablet or whatever, how to make sure that it's kept clean. And sure, we've got processes. I don't want anyone to think that I'm putting people at risk, but it's pretty challenging, and how do we make that easier? And then my second is, we're still doing a lot of typing and entering. So what's the opportunity to really leverage voice to text inside a health record or a health or health business processes? And I think that would be amazing if someone in the Canterbury Tech community could solve that for us, and that it was HIPAA compliant, and it was safe, and it was secure, and it wasn't Zach, that it was real. I'd be really, really pleased.
I like that. That's quite good. Cool. And to what extent that you can share, what are the key risks and challenges that the CDHB see on the horizon with COVID-19? And what role might tech play in ameliorating those?
I think tech's already playing it, but so it's the length of time and the ability for us to flex in and out of the different alerts, because something tells me, and I don't know how you guys are feeling, is that we're going to have times where we're in alert level 4, and like now, and then we might be in alert level 3, and then we might be in alert level 2, then we might be back in alert level 3, and then we might be maybe back in alert level 4. So how do we ensure that there's enough capability and capacity to handle that level of flex, both from a business perspective, because I'm really concerned that we ensure that our tech community stay employed, because I need them in terms of those that are delivering to us. So making sure we've got some good mechanisms for that. In terms of things we're concerned about, the same thing really. So when we're in alert level 4, and there's a number of different traffic light systems that go to signal where the hospital or where the system's at. And that goes from red to green, as you can imagine. At the moment, we're orange, which means there's no elective surgery. There's really strict capacity processes. But when we shift, how do you bring back services? How do you engage the clinical staff? How do we ensure that the whole system works together? And the other one, I guess, that I think is going to have a big change is the genie is out of the bottle for primary care. They have gone to virtual health and delivering virtual health care as part of their response to Alert Level 4. And their business model and the process to support that, I think we need to carefully step through. But there is no way the New Zealand public are going to necessarily want to go back to only being able to have a face-to-face appointment with your general practice team.
Very big changes happening in the world. No one, I think 6 months ago, none of us would have seen this coming. You're doing an amazing job to chart this course and keep the CDHB responding as quickly as they can. So thank you for all you do. We really appreciate that, Stella, you and your team. Brent, have we got, I don't know if we've got time for any questions, Neil, but have we got any good questions there, Brent? Unmute your microphone.
I'm muting now. No, there's no questions per se, but there are certainly comments saying what awesome work is being done. And Taylor has mentioned that they've got very good discipline and cleaning regimes, along with a whole lot of alcohol and ethanol for keeping the equipment sterilised. But no questions per se.
Nice stuff. Well, thank you so much for your time, Stella. Really appreciate it this evening. I know you've got a lot on your plate at the moment, and we really do appreciate you giving us a bit of an update.
You might need to unmute your microphone, Andy.
Sorry?
He's good, I think.
Right.
So
I missed that.
I figured that I'd take everyone off mute for a short spell, and we'd all show our appreciation to Stella and some of the rest of the CDHB team. I know there's a few on this call, so you've got about 10 or 15 seconds to make a bit of a hoo-ha, wave, whatever you'd like.
Yay, awesome work, Stella.
Fantastic.
Time.
Right,
Andy.
thanks so much. We really do appreciate all that you and your DHB team are doing, Stella. It does, it's challenges that none of us ever envisaged you'd probably be having to deal with on a daily basis, and you're doing a phenomenal job.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time. Really appreciate it.
Welcome.
Nice comment there, David Carter, as well. Best DHB in the country. Proud to be in Canterbury. All right. Now, Steve Knutson is Managing Director of Stratos Technology Partners. Steve, are you unmuted?
Oh, got the wrong Steve.
Wrong Steve.
Slack. Where's Knutson gone?
I'm down here somewhere, Neil.
Oh, there he is. Sorry about that, Steve. Wakefield, over to
There
you,
we go.
Knutson.
Welcome, Steve. I understand you've been pretty busy in the last few weeks with a bunch of projects for various clients in the health sector. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I have been. So firstly, hi everyone. Thank you, Stella. That was a great talk. I enjoyed listening to your view of things and understanding a little bit more about CDHB and so on. I guess where Stratos has come from over the past few months, actually, we've been doing a number of projects in health sector around moving into collaboration tools in the cloud. So mostly around Office 365 and so on. But what's really happened is that a lot of those projects weren't kind of in a complete state. They were in partial states. They were NGO organisations, PHOs, and some work with the DHBs as well. And so what we've been finding, I've got a few notes here that I wanted to go through really on sort of some of the things, the challenges that I've seen, and some of the things that I think might come next. So I'm not sure if I'm able to share my screen, Andy.
Neil, you can control that, can't you?
Neil, can you put me on mute as well, please?
You should be able to share, Steve.
Yeah, hopefully that's working now. Can you see my screen?
We've seen. Yes, we can.
Yes, great. Okay. So I just put a few slides together really just to sort of help guide my thoughts, because Neil called me on Friday. So thanks, Neil. So I think sort of just to get a bit of a start, really, I think before the lockdown, this slide's kind of a little bit about how this, maybe the current state was, probably from my view. So I'd say this is from talking to people that I've worked with in different health organisations and knowing a bit about what I know about the way the world was a few weeks ago. So many health organisations had partly implemented Office 365. There's still a considerable reliance on on-premises systems. They have a lot of paper, a lot of processes, some of them electronic, but a lot requiring signatures, or they're based on spreadsheets or paper-based, fax-based systems. We also had a few people that were trained or experienced in remote working. So if you were working remotely, you're probably the minority a few weeks ago. They have some really important requirements around governance, privacy, security and compliance, particularly things like Public Records Act, safety, privacy of health data, and just having good governance around what you've got. We also know that health organisations had time pressure. Everybody was busy, and also combined with that, working with pretty tight budgets. So then along came COVID-19, and we needed to rapidly adopt working from home. For some organisations, this was pretty quick, and I know that because our phone was ringing, saying, "Help! What's the very minimum we need to do to be able to work from home safely?" And so what I've sort of seen with organisations was still that first week, the real urgent requirement was the ability to meet remotely, some very basic document sharing, and basic communication requirements. So those three things were what they really cared about, and the rest of the time, people were largely spending getting to grips with technology, sorting out their working from home environment, so sorting out the office and the routine, and possibly sharing houses with other people and so on. So that was sort of the first week of lockdown, and then it quite quickly came around to some follow-on needs, and those follow-on needs were really around better communication, and I'll include in that things like how to meet and how to meet with different groups of people. They needed access to resources, so forms, processes, documents, policies, general information, and so on. They also needed to learn how to work together remotely better, and they also needed to learn about task management. A lot of the things that we find when you're working remotely and you don't have the person nearby, it's different. You don't pick up what they're doing. You don't have those same sorts of engagements with people. So finding ways to have that was really important. And that threw up some challenges. I think there's three obvious ones, and then there's a whole lot of others that came along. But the big ones, to my mind, that I saw really was people dealing with security and compliance. Some examples of that would be we're trying to mass migrate documents into the cloud. What's the content of those documents? Is there patient identifiable information in there that we need to think about? Is there a record keeping requirement that we can probably ignore for the moment but might need to deal with later? People were learning on the fly and making mistakes quite quickly, as you do at the start of the learning curve. You're at the steepest point. You're working very hard, you're tired, and you're making mistakes as well as making some steps forward. So those sorts of things, we're seeing quite a bit of that happening. And I'd say that even within our own team, we were learning pretty rapidly ourselves. We had a lot of paper-based processes where, but you don't have a scanner nearby, so you can't sign something and scan it back. So lots of questions about how do you do that? Do we need signatures? And how are we going to manage that paperwork and actually keeping track of it? So an example might be a form that has a multi-stage sign-off across the organisation. So you can't just pass it on a clipboard to the next person. You've got to send that electronically somehow to get that process, and then you've got to track it. So what happens if it gets to someone and they're delayed, or they don't receive it, and they don't pass it on? How do we know what's happening next? There's also the risk of duplication. So when we're working in the cloud, when we're working sort of in a document management type environment, we have a single source of truth for that document usually. When we suddenly become people that are sharing documents again through email attachments, we've uploaded a copy for our own use and those sorts of things, the risk of duplication becomes high. And also actually working back and going, well, what's the actual master document that we should be working off? Those things become a problem. There's also the obvious issues of limited resources around both people and finances. The people one kind of extends a little bit too, because not only were people trying to learn to work from home, they're also trying to get their families settled in. They're trying to figure out how to all of the other things in their personal lives at the same time as trying to work into working from home. And so everybody was very time poor. I think we all know everybody was pretty tired that first week. And then the last one, the unforeseen bottleneck. There are lots of bottlenecks that happen for all kinds of reasons that don't get picked up until you start trying to do things remotely. And the reason for that is you end up with a person that becomes, or a process that becomes a bottleneck in the system. And these things started popping up all over the place. And then people then started to try and find solutions to that. So how do we avoid those bottlenecks, or how do we address them as we're going? So that's kind of the building up. Now, I think one thing we need to really be careful of, though, is if we look out into the future a wee bit, is at some point we're going to come back to normal. And as Stella pointed out, that might be a fluctuating up and down. We may drop down a few levels and then pop back up in terms of status for a while. But at some point in the future, we need to get back to normal. And so our strategy for working with technology really needs to also take that into consideration, or quite a few things into consideration. So how do we tidy up our content at the end? So with compliance issues, duplication of content, classification requirements, compliance requirements, I've got compliance there twice. We also need to understand the ways those new ways of working will actually influence what plays out in the future. So we'll probably keep some of the new habits we develop, and we'll probably drop some, but how do we determine which ones we keep and which ones we drop? That's something that we'll need to all work on together individually and as groups. And then also, there's probably going to be some changes. I think as organisations have realised the rapid move to the cloud, it may change organisational priorities over the medium to longer term. We're doing things very tactically at the moment, but this change might lead us to working in new ways that technology can help us, from everything from working digitally to mobility, the security around that, and how we actually interact with each other across organisations, and so on as well. It'll lead to different technology decisions, and it'll lead to different training decisions, I think. We're already seeing some of that now with sort of the week 3 questions this week. People are starting to consider how do we merge this stuff back in? What do we do when we're back on deck? There's some optimists out there, and there's some other pessimists as well, I think, in terms of the timeline.
It's probably going to be a tiered thing, isn't it, Steve? So we're going to have to deal with one sort of set of things at level 3 and one at 2 and then back to 4. And so it has to be a system that can very much iterate as it goes. Yeah,
I believe so. I think you need to plan for it, because the one thing that's sure is we don't actually know what the end looks like yet. And that affects health and as well as the vendor community as well. And it in fact affects people that are in contract roles in IT. If we're seeing outside of health, we're seeing IT contract roles dropping off because the work's not available to pay for those people. So now they're suddenly looking for new opportunities and so on. That's both a good thing and a bad thing, I think. In some ways, we might be able to repurpose those people to working in health, but in other areas, some people are going to be really quite stuck. So it affects the technology sector in a much wider way, I think. We're already seeing a bit of that in Christchurch with some other organisations. But I think the one thing that I think about in terms of the whole technology, where I've seen organisations going really well with moving to the cloud quickly, and where I've seen a few shaky, but being a bit shaky, has been the culture of those organisations. And the technology platforms these days are pretty good. They're pretty reliable. They're fairly stable. They can be scaled up, particularly the cloud solutions can be scaled up quite rapidly, as we've seen. It's not like it was 10 years ago when we were trying to do these things around the earthquake. And so the technology is actually probably almost the easy part of the problem. I think culture has the biggest impact on the ability for an organisation to move and work remotely. And it's everything from how we're dealing with fear and uncertainty within our workforce and how we're communicating with our teams. We've got people that are worrying about their future and can't get on with their work. It's how we deal with rapid change. You know, most people don't handle rapid change very well. And all of a sudden we're throwing things at them at breakneck speed and expecting them to be able to pick it up quickly. Those things are difficult. How we communicate is incredibly important. I think we need to be very, very clear in our communication. And we also, one thing I've noticed, I think, is probably the timeliness of communication is also very important now, more important perhaps. One of the really big things though is actually how we trust each other. So trusting each other to do the right thing and to deliver the right thing between organisations like mine where we're providing a service and our clients and our health sector and the community in general is absolutely critical. If people take an approach where they are looking for a quick buck, for example, it's not going to end well for anyone involved, I don't think. This is a really a whole of community issue, and we need to deal with it all together. And so I think that level of trust has to be very high and not be abused. I think there's lots we need to do there just to make sure that everybody's behaving well, I think. And I think the last thing I say is if we feel like we're working towards a common goal, then people will go the extra mile. We see that with people in service organisations. We see that within the health sector itself. People want to help. They want opportunities to help. And so, you know, if there are ways that we can do that, and I think that's something actually Neil Canterbury Tech could help with, providing opportunities for people to help would be a great thing for the community as a whole. And I think I'll leave it there. That's probably pretty much all I've got to say. Has anybody got any questions?
Any questions, Brent?
There we go. Yes, there is. Alex has asked, how do you address the requirements for signatures on paper?
Okay, so a couple of ways you can do that. So
briefly.
Yeah, probably DocuSign or Adobe signature type services can be used in workflows to pick up signatures and sign documents. Those are probably the two most common ones. They are paid solutions though, so there's a cost per signature. So some organisations, that's fine for like a large, say, an external contract. But if you're doing it for an internal signature on a piece of paper, then Office 365's got some basic ways to do that. But probably they wouldn't hold up in the court of law. But they do things like lock the document once signed.
A couple of people have suggested HelloSign and Adobe.
Yep. Yeah, there's a number. If you're using Office 365, the Microsoft Flow has connectors for most of the signature tools, and they'll plug into Microsoft Word and so on as well.
Yep. There's a question here. Are people putting in temp solutions or solutions that will remain and make our capability stronger? And if Stella's still online, it was addressed to her as well.
I think there's a mix. There's some stuff which is definitely accelerating, but will need a tidy up afterwards in the longer term. And there's some stuff that's certainly been put in just for a quick, immediate service. But I think it'll probably stick around. There's no such thing as a temporary solution, is there?
Just a solution that hasn't been fully developed yet. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
There's a question here: the culture around daily video stand-ups.
Yeah, so that's actually something I've seen done at scale outside of the health sector. Actually, with Synlay, they do a weekly stand-up where their CEO does a 10-minute talk. They're using a technology called live meetings, which is part of Microsoft Teams, and supports up to 10,000 people in a meeting. They had 300 at their first one they ran last week on that. and that works really well for broadcast type scenarios, but it doesn't have like a feedback mechanism. But we do see a bit of that. Stella's probably got an answer too.
Neil, do you want to unmute Stella?
Thank you. So I was going to reinforce the fact that most of the things we're trying to do are not temporary, because you want to make sure that if you're investing in a change, while it might be an MVP, you're clear about the fact that it needs to be continued and scaled. So we've been quite savvy around that. And then in terms of the stand-ups, so my team are continuing to run their sprints. We're still migrating applications to cloud. We're still doing a whole bunch of the work that we needed to do. And then every Friday, I have a broadcast to all 120 staff for 30 minutes where they can chat and ask me questions and just try and keep everyone calm.
Do you encourage them to have a wine with that, Stella?
He actually has a dry policy, so no.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your time, Steve. Appreciate those insights. It's really good. Now, Neil, we're going to do our networking breakout.
Well, that was the idea, Andy.
We are running a little behind time, I note.
Well, it's all part of my plan for not having breakout rooms working as intended. I don't know why it doesn't show, but they're not available to me today. I did enable them, so don't bombard me with suggestions, please. They're a wonderfully chaotic way of chucking people into breakout rooms for a chat, but not today, sorry. So we shall have to move along, and I will take the liberty of...
All right, so we're heading straight into George then?
Correct.
Nice.
That
All
works
right,
for
well.
me. That works for me.
Perfect. Thank you, George. George Wells, Managing Director of Media Suite, has been working with widely distributed teams for years, unlike some of us who have been just forced to do it recently. George, take it away.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys. Yeah, so Neil asked me, a little bit like Steve, quite late on Friday, whether mind sharing a few thoughts. No problem at all. I chucked a couple of slides together for you. I have to confess, I didn't choose the topic, that was Neil. But I have to confess that maintaining a positive team and company culture while working distributed, there's absolutely no way I can do it justice in 10 minutes or less. So rather than giving you a rundown of all the things we do to try and manage a distributed team, I thought I'd just share 3 little secrets with you. But before I do that, I need to give you a little bit of context because it won't make sense unless you know who we are. So Media Suite's close to 20 years old. We're a software development company, so most of our experience comes from the perspective of running and managing software development teams. Back in 2002, in our second year, I think it was, we actually opened a remote office. And like most companies at the time, we used email and the telephone to manage those day-to-day remote operations. And I have to say that technology was as good then as it is today. Arguably, actually, it was better then. The only difference that I've seen is that it wasn't called remote working back then. Back then, it was called telecommuting. So fast forward to about a decade ago, I spent 2 very long years managing the company remotely while living in Wellington. And I have to confess, I found working from home to be a pretty lonely existence. My partner would come home with all sorts of gossip from her workplace, and I found that I felt somewhat left out. So I think it's fair to say I didn't enjoy my time working in unforced isolation. But in hindsight, I think that experience laid some of the key foundations within our company, which actually got us through 2011, when the whole company was rather abruptly forced to work remotely for a good period. And it was interesting, after the earthquakes, many of our team continued to work remote. And I think by about 2015, at least half the development team were working remotely on a full-time basis. And I think we had, by that point, we had people in Europe, some in Asia, someone in the USA, and we had a bunch of people all around New Zealand. So not only were we coming to terms with remote working, but we're also tackling the new pain that comes with working across multiple time zones. So as a company, we've learned a lot about distributed working. And to be honest, the important stuff you learn, sorry, Steve, is not about the technology, in my opinion. But you're right on with the culture stuff. So one of the first things that happens when you start running a distributed team is that this glaring bright spotlight gets shined directly on your company weaknesses. It's brutal. So you're forced to evaluate some pretty fundamental organizational issues in some new ways. Really obvious things like purpose. How do you steer and orientate a distributed workforce? Authority. How do you hold power and make decision making? And how do you share that across the organization? With information, how do you use it, share it, and as Steve said, secure it, which is vitally important. Company structure, how do you get your teams organized and sized to be able to work remotely? Do you run a centralized management system or do you decentralize your management? Strategy, how do you plan and prioritize your resources? How do you learn and evolve? How do you hold meetings? How do you convene and coordinate those people coming together? And how do you grow and mature when you're working remote? Are the priorities different from when you're in an office? And another thing I think needs to be considered is compensation. How do you pay and provide for your people? Do you pay for time when they're sitting in an office, or do you start paying for outcomes? So there's really no way I'm going to be able to step you through everything that we've adjusted to after the last decade or so, but I will share a few secrets. So the first secret I want to share is a goodie, the best practice for working across distributed teams. And the first thing you need to know is this is not a secret. The second thing you need to know is that it should not be called best practices for working across distributed teams. It should be called best practice for working across the knowledge economy, because all of these ideas help you as much, if not more, in an office environment. So as knowledge workers, we face a tricky paradox. Our work typically requires us to go into some pretty deep thought and have prolonged periods of concentration. It also requires us to collaborate closely with others. And those two things are not easy to do together. So workplaces typically develop their own cultural norms around how to best balance out this paradox. Nothing is going to frustrate your team members more than them feeling inefficient, like they can't get their head into something, or that they're unable to contribute their best at work. So the same simple rules that make life easier for knowledge workers in an office also make it a lot easier in remote land. It's really simple. Number one, communicate clearly. At Media Suite, we put a huge amount of value on clear and concise communication. It just makes so many problems go away. Number two, if you can understand my graphics there, hopefully you can decipher these. Favor asynchronous communication when possible. I could actually do a whole presentation on asynchronous communication and the benefits over real-time meetings or chat. But the first, most obvious thing with non-real-time communication is that it doesn't interrupt you. So it lets you get into that deep thought. You can stay in flow until you're ready to engage. But the real benefits of asynchronous communication is that by giving the recipient time and space to respond, you typically get a much better quality of engagement and response. Number three, document your decisions and why you made them. It kind of goes without saying, but you need to document the decisions you make and why you made them as a team or as an individual. Your future self will thank me. And finally, number four, don't leave it till the last minute to ask for help. Picking the perfect time to ask for help is sometimes trickier than it sounds. Exactly how much effort someone should put in before trying to figure out themselves before asking for help, it's difficult to really know for sure. One thing is for sure, it's always better to ask too early than too late. And this is something that gets much harder when working remotely, particularly if you're used to shoulder tapping a colleague. So it's definitely worth talking as a team about how you go about asking for help and the rules that you as a team put around that. Secret number two, Maintaining a distributed culture requires a deliberate approach. Don't just let things happen. You need to take active steps to set or recalibrate the cultural norms within your teams and the wider company. There are some significant downsides to working remotely. For example, it's much harder to spot when people are burning out or feeling lonely. Onboarding new hires is tough. We did one on Monday. Managers can't just do a quick walk around the office to get a sense of the vibe. You have to put a lot more effort in than that. And companies need to expect managers will need more time with that. Staying connected with your people does require a lot more effort. And it's not just about working remote right now. The stress of being in the midst of a global pandemic is a whole nother layer on things. So you definitely need to be managing things as best you can. Since we went fully remote, 2.5 weeks ago, we asked all our team leads and coaches to move all their monthly one-on-ones to a weekly cadence. And they're all reporting back to a team of coaches who then raise issues up through the organization, and we find out, and we're coming forward with all sorts of suggestions on how to go about solving problems or helping people be more happy. Some of the really simple things we've done: we held a quiz on Friday night. Took some organization, great fun. We hold learning lunches. In the office, we keep those going remote. Someone takes the time to prepare something and everybody comes in and listens. And my final secret is secret number 3, remote working is easiest when everyone is remote. I have to confess, having a hybrid of some people in an office and some people remote is actually much, much harder than having everybody remote at the same time. One of the hardest challenges we've had to overcome is the silo effect that our physical offices create. Those kitchen catch-ups and the banter and the ad hoc meetings, the undocumented decisions made on the fly, all make it harder for the remote people to feel and behave like first-class citizens. So this social experiment we're all living through right now is possibly a blessing in disguise for many companies. I think it's going to shine a light on areas of your culture that might need to be worked on. And there's no question in my mind that having people remote on our team over a decade or so has solidified our culture, improved the quality of our work, and pushed us to be a much stronger organization. So I hope some of that helps. Thanks, everybody. If anyone's got any questions, shoot them over.
Brent, any questions?
Not at this stage.
Great.
There's quite a bit of thanks.
Move on.
Thanks.
Or is something coming through?
No, just a lot of thanks and great talks. Thanks, that was great. Yeah, generally a lot of thanks. I think a lot of people got a lot out of it. Certainly, as we moved to a digital in the last couple of weeks, yeah, it was very good for myself personally.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much for your time, George. Really do appreciate you giving us those insights this evening. And I think we've all probably observed some of those over the last couple of weeks of everybody, as you say, being culturally forced to work from homes. It's certainly making a change. It's been quite interesting. Our final speaker for this evening is Dan Fowlie. Dan is the founder and COO of Trineo. Trineo's got offices in Christchurch, Auckland, Sydney, and Boulder, Colorado. So Dan is used to spending a lot of time and energy nurturing relationships with virtual teams and remote staff, much as George does. Hi, Dan.
Hello. Thank you for having me. Yeah, I think there will be a lot of overlap with some of the ideas you just heard from George, and it's probably no. George and I catch up for lunch, every 6 months or so, and there's a lot of overlapping philosophies between our organisation. So, kick off with a little bit of background. I assume everyone can see my screen. So, as you said in the intro, we are a distributed team by nature. So we started in Christchurch, and just like other people, earthquakes happen, and that causes you to look further afield. So we actually started employing our first remote workers that then turned into offices in other locations around that late 2011, 2012 mark in Sydney and Auckland at those times. and then transitioned later on to the office in the USA. Now, in every case of those, we have physical office locations in each of those cities now, but the first person in each of those locations was typically working from their spare bedroom as we look to ramp up a presence in a new location. So now we find ourselves with these 4 offices, and people are still working across those offices. We have this possibly odd situation where at the moment I don't believe we have any Christchurch clients whatsoever. So Christchurch is our biggest office, but every single person in that office is working for services projects for clients. Probably half the Christchurch team work on US projects currently. So we've had the tools from very early on for a company that's 10 years old, just when all the right tools were coming up. And so that has led over time to building up this remote team in different parts of the country and the world, as you can kind of see on this list here, everywhere from Cromwell. We did have team members in Oslo and Eindhoven for a period of time for a couple of years. We did find time zones very hard with that one. But now we've got a lot of team members spread around. The funny thing with a lot of these team members was they started with us in our core offices, and then for various personal reasons, they wanted or needed to move to another location, and they built up that level of trust with us, and so we allowed them to take that next leap into working remotely. So as you can see on the map, so mostly in New Zealand, but good 25 people overseas as to the way we work. So just wanted to share some of the things that we've had in place for a while, both for remote workers that we've had, but also just general being the distributed team that we are, people working across projects that span offices. So one of the things we kicked off last year, I think it was we actually got all of the remote team together for a retro. And we asked them what works being remote and what doesn't work. And it highlighted, exactly George's story of working in Wellington. People felt isolated at times. They missed that banter that they have with their colleagues, particularly if they had previously been in one of our offices and moved out to working remote. So we gathered all of their thoughts and then put in place, some actions coming out of that in terms of how we can make their life better. And one of the things that we actually kicked off last year was Remote Worker Appreciation Day. So we had a day in the calendar where we all took time to acknowledge our remote workers, and we organised for a gift to turn up at the homes of each of our remote workers at that time. This is a nice little touch to show that we haven't forgotten about them. Another thing that we've really put in place in the last 2 years is we have what we call the People Experience Team. It's a team of 5 people. So we have our Chief People Officer and 1 person in each of our 4 locations. And their job is to make sure that the experience of working at Trineo is a great one, be it a team member, remote or in an office. And their job is, it's all they do, is think about how to make life at Trineo better. So we have dedicated thought going in on a regular basis as to how we can make life for them better. Another thing I wanted to touch on, again, building on George's point about asynchronous, is we have a culture of writing as thinking. So, how often has someone called a meeting, you turn up and they give you a pitch, and you basically have to give your spontaneous response to whatever's being put in front of you there and then. You don't get that critical thought time to actually consider something and give an appropriate response. So we've pushed this a lot in the last 12 to 18 months, and it's something that I've read that Jeff Bezos implemented at Amazon as well, is that you should, ahead of any kind of meeting that you call, you should do some writing, distribute your thinking ahead of time so people can consider it, and then come back and respond in an appropriate manner with their thoughts fully formed. We've found this a great addition to how we've run things in recent times, and it just makes things so much clearer as ideas are shared amongst the team. In addition, for the remote workers, we provide contributions towards the expenses of working from home. And then where possible, we will fly remote workers to their nearest office every 6 months or so they actually do get to catch up with their colleagues in person as well. And that typically it coincides with our Christmas party and then once mid-year as well. So what have we done in the immediate time after this lockdown from 2 weeks ago? So all staff have a health and wellness allowance that we provide, and we've increased that by 33% immediately so that people can make better use of that. We've introduced the ability for staff to get apps like Calm for guided meditations, and we're very soon rolling out change management training, which was something that Steve picked up on as well, is that not everyone's used to this level of change. So we want to give everyone some training to help deal with that as it comes through. We use a very good tool called 15.5 that we use as our weekly check-in tool to get a feel for how people are, how their week's gone, how they're tracking, and that gives you the ability to add custom questions. So we've added a new question set from 2 weeks ago that we're tracking every week, where we get people to rate their stress levels, productivity, and work-life balance out of 5, and they can also add some commentary about any challenges they're facing on that. So we can kind of track that over time and just see if there's anything's going array there. And then we've been big users of video chats and stand-ups and for a long time, and so a lot of this has organically come about as people just getting together on the different platforms that we have for calls to play games, do quizzes, have lunches, virtual beers and virtual lunches. So that hasn't really been driven. That's sort of been very bottom up, driven by the people who've said, look, I'm going to start a game of Quiplash this afternoon, who's in? And we still need to be productive and get our work done, but 4:30 on a Friday rolls around and the team are getting into it and catching up over a virtual beverage. So what more do we still want to do? So obviously this particular time has been very challenging for those with young kids, and so we have been putting in some arrangements and flexi time so that staff can manage that. We're focusing really highly on how we communicate. As we said, there's a lot of people who are uneasy about what does this current situation mean for their day-to-day life. What happens if customers come and go, all these things that there's uncertainty about, and all we can do is be transparent and communicate what we see happening. And then ensure that we're all aligned around priorities. So, give you an example of this. We had our leadership team summit a month ago, just before this all happened. We defined 4 high-level goals for the organisation for the financial year that's just kicked off. We've just thrown all of those out the window, and we've settled on a single goal for the next 9 months, which is to get through this crisis and be in a strong position on the other side. It's been really interesting to once you strip it all back as to what are the important things when times are tough to get through, and we've really honed in on that, and everyone's aligned on that. We've then been doing a roadshow with the exec team across the different offices so that people can ask questions and give feedback on anything they're feeling uneasy about and how we can help address that over the time. Tools just made a comment here that everyone says this unprecedented situation, but it now has a precedent. So next time this happens, if we go back to 3 and 4, as we talked about, there's going to be a time where you won't have an excuse of saying this hasn't happened before. Every organisation is going to have business continuity plans that allow for this 48 hours notice to work from home or shut down your business. That's going to be the new normal, and everyone needs the tools in place to prepare. And lastly, just to keep measuring how the team's feeling, get that quantitative and qualitative feedback through lots of one-on-ones, lots of communication with the team, and really, we're all going through this together, we're all in the same boat, and absorb that and figure out how we can all get through this together. So hopefully there's some thoughts in there that were useful.
Yeah, that's excellent, Dan. And I think, as you say, having that flexibility and being able to allow your people to have that time to look after family and doing the check-in, that's really good. And I'm impressed with the wellness app. What was that called again?
So it's a performance management app that we use called 15.5. and it tracks a whole range of things from annual performance reviews, weekly one-on-ones. It has this nice weekly check-in feature that allows you to track the pulse of the organisation.
I can imagine their share price has probably gone up in the last couple of weeks, just like Zoom has. All right. Any questions for Dan, Brent?
Yes, we've got a few. Helen has asked, how do you manage the differences in extroverts and introvert styles in your team? Some of the initiatives might work better for some than others.
Yep, that's a good question. I think like many IT organizations where we're probably more skewed on the introvert side, and a number of the team I think are just really comfortable working in this mode, really comfortable with asynchronous communication. So yeah, I can think of maybe it's perhaps the more extroverted ones who are struggling at the moment, and those that uncoincidentally are the ones who are organising the quiz nights and the different social interactions that are happening. So I think everyone's finding their place about how they fit in this new world.
Question here from Tony to George and or Dan. How are your in-house workers handling the new working from home situation during a pandemic? Even native working from home workers know this is not normal situation and a harsh introduction to actually working from home.
I'll just quickly answer that. One point I forgot to make is we have had a work from home policy for the last 2 years that all staff can work from home 1 to 2 days a week. So for most of our staff, this has not been something too new. So most people are coping with it pretty well.
George?
Yeah, we're in a pretty similar boat. So when we tried to overcome the office silo, we actually encouraged a lot of people to go and try working from home. And we've been doing that for a long time. So most of our team are experienced from working from home. We've had a few challenges. Certainly, as Dan said, people with young kids, I think, have got some pretty tricky pressure on them, especially we've got 2 parents trying to hold down full-time jobs. That's my wife and I are trying to do that at the moment, and it's just near impossible. And we've also had some relatively new people in the organisation too who haven't worked from home before. And yeah, there's a few people who are struggling with it. And really all you can do is check in, help them out, make sure that someone's there for them. And when you dig into things, as we heard, it's not just about the tools and how to do it. It's also the extra stress of people's grandmas and worried about parents and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, there's a lot going on right now, and I don't think anybody's saying it's easy.
George, while you're still there, there was another question for you. What is your answer to outcome-based compensation?
Yeah, I don't have a great answer to it, other than anybody who works on a fixed price contract is kind of doing that already. So a lot of organizations do that. That's pretty normal. And people do contract out stuff. So, I think, well-defined jobs. If you can spec up what you need done reasonably well, and have ways to measure quality and all that kind of stuff externally, then it can definitely work. But I do have in the back of my mind that we're going to have a lot of disruption in jobs out of the back of this, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see a kind of increase in the gig economy sort of stuff going on. So that's a new opportunity, but it also kind of creates some new challenges. How do you handle a welfare system when people are doing little bits of work? Right now, our welfare system doesn't fit that model well. So there's a lot of stuff that needs to adjust to make all of that kind of gig economy or working for outcome stuff work.
Cool. Any tips for keeping asynchronous communication human and personal?
I have an odd answer for that because I wrote about it internally last week. I actually think we're a big Slack organization, and the use of emojis just to add tone to short form communication, I think actually makes a big difference. to understanding where someone's coming from when you're missing those nuanced cues of body language and other things. A smiley face on the end of a comment on Slack goes a long way to understanding that someone's not annoyed with you or otherwise if you're having some kind of constructive debate.
Yeah, I think one warning, I guess, if you're fairly new to doing a lot of asynchronous communication, that it's often misinterpreted. Written word is often misinterpreted. And our line at Media Suite is it's actually on the recipient to not be offended, because there's absolutely no way you can actually construct written word and not someone else. It's actually about the person receiving it. So you have to train people to kind of read something and just assume that it's not someone trying to be short or snippy, and try to dig into what they're really saying. So it's quite a bit of training for the recipient to deal with the written comms.
Andy has asked or said that their company is reluctant to recruit more remote workers because of privacy IP concerns for remote workers in other legal jurisdictions. Any tips on how to address that?
I think for us, we have always hired remote workers that are in the same legal jurisdictions as where we've set up entities and where we have physical offices. So haven't quite dealt with that scenario. And obviously therefore legal systems that we're familiar with. We don't have any experience going too much further abroad.
Yeah, I have to admit, something we've had to pull back on over the last few years. We work on a lot of government systems, and we just can't have offshore people working on a lot of our stuff these days.
Is one that I'm interested in as well. Interested in whether important for everyone to have video on. Is it easy to pick up non-verbal cues, and does it make people more engaged?
We have certain meetings, team meetings, where we won't start the meeting until everyone's video cameras are on. We want to make sure that they're engaged and participating. So yeah, definitely think that's crucial if it's available, and it's such high quality now that it makes sense to have it.
How do you foster constructive conflict?
I saw that one in the feed. This is something more recently we've sort of introduced this red team, blue team approach, which is, and then we forget what each color means and we just make it up. But it's kind of this notion that rather than presenting some constructive criticism, you prefix it by saying, I'm going to go red team on this idea, and then give your feedback. And people just, it feels less personal that way, and it's actually encouraged people to give more critical thought and feedback on different things.
Good idea. How do you cater for different working styles, e.g. visual, who need to draw?
George, you had a whiteboard in the back of one of your pictures.
Yeah, and we've got quite a few visual thinkers on our team. It's still, so I don't like to call it a tool, to be honest, but we've got some online tools that let us kind of draw in real time on the same board and collaborate that way. The presentation that I ran this evening, it was about lunchtime, and I threw it over some rough notes to one of our visual people and said, can you knock up a couple of slides? And we quickly collaborated for about 15 minutes. She sketched up some stuff, and that arrived at about 15 minutes before my presentation. So yeah, there's definitely tools around to help with that. I was talking actually to our lead UX creative director, Andrew, this morning in a one-on-one. I hope he doesn't mind me sharing. He's been really struggling getting feedback on a lot of his interface designs, because he's not getting the really nuanced communication that you get from looking someone in the eyes, or often the things they don't say. And so he's really struggling right now to do his job well and figure out how to build great user interfaces, because he's just not getting the nuanced feedback. And I don't have a good answer for him yet. You can get analytical. You can put systems in that track exactly how people use interfaces. That's one way of doing it. We have got software that will actually track people's facial expressions and what they're doing when they're using our systems, which is one of the ways we help to design good systems. So there are all sorts of bits of tech out there that help with that kind of stuff. But yeah, the different styles are tricky to accommodate them all.
Yeah. Question for any of the speakers: have you needed to address staff pay, i.e., any reductions or plans due to loss of income?
No for us.
Yeah, no, we one of our comms that we put out a couple of weeks ago was we told everyone in the company how much money we had in the bank and how long that was going to last, and that we were fully prepared to burn that down before letting anyone go. So that really settled the team, and I think that's been really helpful for calming a lot of nerves, because there have been some horror stories. A lot of partners of some of our team have lost their jobs and that kind of stuff. So giving them that confidence and certainty has been really useful. And I have to admit, we've had one of the best months we've ever had last month, and it was amid a crisis.
Obviously, we're from the public sector at the moment, so protected for now.
Dan, any thoughts?
Yeah, so our approach has been very similar to George. We've been very transparent with the team, and haven't needed to do anything at this stage, given the diversity of kind of industries and countries we're across.
I think that's probably a key for all of us, really. Transparency is probably one of the things that employees and other team members most value. And I think, yeah, the more our organisations can be transparent with people about, look, this is where we're at, rather than, you know, the second guessing, the uncertainty. I think that's one of the things that upsets people the most. I was impressed with the government making the site available that actually could show which employers had actually got the subsidy. So people, if they've got any doubts, can actually go and check that to see, you know, well, are they telling me the truth? That sort of stuff's quite good. So yeah, it's great. Hey, thank you so much for your time, everybody. I really do appreciate it. We've gone a little bit over time, about 20 minutes, but that's okay. Thanks to all the comments that have come through on the feed as well. Great to see comments from a whole pile of people, and some suggestions in there. We will be sending a feedback survey around tomorrow. So we would love you all. You know, I think that I saw a peak of about 178 people watching Stella's presentation. And for us, that's just phenomenal. I think that's the largest event we've ever done outside of a cluster meeting, outside of a summit, sorry. Largest cluster meeting we've ever done. So it would seem like this format's working. Obviously, we want to iterate, we want to improve, and we'll tweak as we go. So really do want your feedback, and interested in your thoughts on, you know, other subjects that we could look at, speakers that we should be including in the mix. Hopefully in 2 weeks' time, level 4 will be dropping to a level 3 or a level 2, if the curve keeps flattening, as it's looking like it is, which is good. So I guess we've all got this new way of working that we've just got to get used to, and it's going to be interesting times. Neil, do you want to do a little chat session? I see you didn't reply to my text.
No, I think it's time we stopped. People got dinner to make. I know I do. So, look, I'm sorry I couldn't get breakout rooms working. This was meant to be more interactive than it's turned out. Apologies. We'll try harder for next time. So, well, I'm just going to take the liberty of taking everybody off unmute so they can say thank you in some way to all of our speakers, and then we'll call it a night.
Thank you.
Guys, great.
Thanks, guys. That was awesome.
Fantastic.
Everyone stay safe, stay home, look out for those that are in your bubble, and try and have a good Easter. I was very pleased to hear the Prime Minister say that the Easter Bunny is allowed to come this year. My children are highly relieved. The Easter Bunny and the Tooth Fairy have got a clearance. They are essential.
Are you looking it up?
So try and find ways to celebrate with your family, stick in your bubble, and we'll chat again real soon.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Good job, everybody. Yeah.